She didn't come home for hours. Now, her stuff's in the driveway. Look, I'm going to tell you about the night I put my wife's belongings in the driveway after 19 years of marriage. But before you judge me, before you call me crazy or say I handled it wrong, let me explain something. I did everything, and I mean everything, the right way first. I talked to her, I went to therapy, I cut back on work travel like she asked, and she still chose to throw it all away. The cops showed up that night. Our neighbors saw everything. It became this whole spectacle. But here's the thing, nobody tells you about catching your partner cheating. There's no right way to react when your entire world falls apart in front of you. So, yeah, I made some mistakes that night, but I also learned some things. And if you're going through something similar, or you think you might be, this story might save you from making the same mistakes I did. Buckle up, because this is a long one. My wife and I got married when we were 25. We're 44 now, 19 years together, and honestly, for most of that time, I thought we had a good marriage. Not perfect, but good. We had our issues like any couple, but nothing that seemed unfixable. Now, I need to address something right up front because I know someone's going to ask, no, we don't have kids. We tried for a few years early in our marriage and it didn't happen. We talked about IVF and adoption, but my wife eventually said she was okay with it just being the two of us. I was disappointed, but I accepted it. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the first sign she wasn't as invested in this marriage as I was. My job was in pharmaceutical sales, good money, but it required a lot of travel. I'm talking 3 to 4 days a week on the road, hitting up doctors' offices, hospitals, medical conferences. I'd leave Monday morning, come back Thursday night, and do it all over again the next week. The commission was great, and it allowed us to live comfortably. Nice house in the suburbs, 2 cars, vacations twice a year. My wife worked too. She's an office manager at a dental practice, but my income was the bulk of our household earnings. And my wife hated my travel schedule. I mean, hated it. She'd tell me constantly how she felt like a single woman, how I was never there, how she married me to have a partner but ended up alone all the time. I heard it constantly. Every time I'd pack my suitcase, there'd be a comment. Every business trip, there'd be tension before I left. So, about 8 months ago, I made a decision. I went to my boss and told him I needed to cut back on travel because my marriage was suffering. It wasn't an easy conversation. My territory was one of the most lucrative, and scaling back meant potentially less commission. But my boss understood. He restructured my territory, gave me more local accounts, and brought in another rep to cover the longer distance clients. Within a month, I went from traveling 3 to 4 days a week to maybe once a week, sometimes once every 2 weeks. I was home for dinner most nights, home on weekends. I thought my wife would be thrilled. She wasn't. At first, she seemed, I don't know, surprised, like she didn't actually expect me to do it. But then that surprise turned into something else, annoyance, irritation, like I was in her space. I remember one night, about 2 months after I'd cut back on travel, I came home and she was watching TV in the living room. I sat down next to her and she actually sighed, like audibly sighed. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me she just wasn't used to me being there all the time. That should have been my first clue, but I rationalized it. I told myself she just needed time to adjust to the new routine, that we'd find our rhythm again. But things got worse, not better. The intimacy dried up completely. And I'm not just talking about sex, though that stopped too. I'm talking about all of it. The good morning kisses, the hand holding, the little touches throughout the day. All of it just stopped. When I tried to initiate anything, she'd have an excuse. She was tired, not feeling well, had a headache, thought she was getting her period. It was always something. And look, I'm not some Neanderthal who thinks his wife owes him sex. But when you go from being intimate once or twice a week to absolutely nothing for 2 months straight, something's wrong. The phone thing started around the same time. Her phone became an extension of her body. She took it everywhere: the bathroom, the kitchen, even outside to check the mail. Before, she'd leave it lying around without a second thought. Now, it was always in her hand or her pocket, and she got secretive about it. She changed her passcode, started tilting the screen away from me when I walked by. If it buzzed while we were together, she'd glance at it with this look. I can't even describe it, like a mix of excitement and panic. About 3 months into all this weirdness, I decided to talk to her. We were in the living room one evening, and I just came out with it. I asked her if everything was okay, told her she'd been acting really distant lately. She immediately got defensive, asking me why I was even bringing it up. I laid it out for her: how she barely talked to me anymore, how we didn't do anything together, how she seemed annoyed that I was around. She rattled off excuse after excuse about being stressed at work, her hormones being off, being tired all the time. I pushed back gently, suggesting we see a therapist together, talk to someone who could help us work through whatever this was. And here's where it got interesting. She immediately shot that down, said she didn't need therapy, there was nothing wrong, and I was overreacting. I tried to explain that something had clearly changed between us, and I was just trying to figure out what it was. That's when she snapped at me, told me that maybe the problem was that I was home too much now, that she'd gotten used to having her own space, and now I was always there. That hurt. I'm not going to lie. I had restructured my entire career because she complained about me being gone, and now she was saying I was around too much. I stayed calm and asked her what she wanted me to do. Go back to traveling all the time? She said she didn't know. She just needed space. We went to bed angry that night, and things didn't improve. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention, not in a creepy, controlling way. I just started noticing patterns. My wife started going out more, a lot more. She'd say she was meeting a friend for coffee, running to Target, getting her nails done, grabbing lunch with someone. These were not unusual activities, but the frequency was, and the duration. She'd leave for a quick coffee and be gone for 3 hours. She'd go to Target and come back with one bag after 4 hours. One Saturday, she said she was meeting her friend for brunch. Her friend lived about 30 minutes away, so I figured she'd be gone a couple hours. She left at 10 a.m. At 4 p.m., she still wasn't home. I texted her asking if she was still with her friend and when she would be back. She responded an hour later, saying they were just catching up and had lost track of time. She got home at 6:30, an 8.5 hour brunch. When she walked in, I casually asked how her friend was doing, mentioning what a long brunch it had been, and my wife froze, just for a second, but I noticed it. Then she made some comment about how her friend never stops talking and went upstairs to shower. Something felt weird, so I checked the location history on our shared cell phone plan. We had it set up years ago for convenience, finding each other in crowded places, that kind of thing. I honestly forgotten it was even active. I pulled up that Saturday. My wife's phone hadn't been anywhere near her friend's neighborhood. Instead, it had been at an apartment complex for 7 hours. I checked the previous week. The day she'd said she was at Target for 4 hours, her phone had been at the same apartment complex. The lunch with her other friend, same apartment complex. The coffee with yet another friend, you guessed it, same apartment complex. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling sick. Every errand, every coffee date, every girl's lunch, they were all lies. She'd been going to the same place over and over for months. I had a choice to make. I could confront her with the location data, but she could easily explain it away. She could say she was stopping by a coworker's place, helping a friend who lived there, anything. I needed something concrete, something she couldn't deny. So I got some outside help and hired a private investigator. I researched firms online, read reviews, and found a guy who had excellent ratings. I called him one afternoon from my car during lunch. I told him I thought my wife was cheating, that I had location data showing she'd been lying about where she was, but that I needed proof before I made any moves. He explained how his surveillance work operated. He'd need a recent photo of my wife, her vehicle information, her work address, and her typical schedule. Standard surveillance ran about $150 an hour, and for a case like mine, he estimated 30 to 40 hours of work over 7 to 10 days to establish a pattern. I was looking at $4,500 to $6,000, depending on what he found. The price stung, but I needed to know. I told him to do it. I sent the investigator everything he needed by email: a photo of my wife from our last vacation, her work schedule, her car make and model, the address of that apartment complex where her phone kept pinging. Then I waited. Those 10 days were torture. I had to act normal around my wife, make small talk, pretend everything was fine. Meanwhile, I knew the investigator was out there, following her, documenting everything. Every time she left the house, I wondered where she was really going. Every time she came home, I studied her face for signs of guilt. Every time her phone buzzed, I glanced at her to look at her face. The investigator called me on day 7. He told me he had what I needed and asked when we could meet. I asked him how bad it was, and he said he'd rather show me in person. I told him my wife usually goes out around 5:30 or 6 p.m. these days, so he should come by tomorrow after 6. The next evening, my wife came downstairs at 5:45, hair done, makeup on, dressed nicer than she'd dressed for me in months. She barely made eye contact when she told me she was going out for a bit. I asked where she was going. She said she was just running some errands and would be back later. No specifics. No, I'm going to Target or meeting my friend. Just errands. I watched her leave, then texted the investigator that she just left and he was clear to come over. 20 minutes later, the investigator arrived. We sat at my kitchen table and he opened the portfolio. He looked me in the eye and told me straight. My wife was having an affair. It had been going on for at least the past 4 months, probably longer. He slid a photo across the table. My wife kissing a man. They were standing next to a car outside a movie theater. My wife and this man walking into the apartment complex, his arm around her waist. Another. The two of them at a restaurant sitting next to each other. The investigator pulled out his laptop and showed me time-stamped footage, 7 different days. Each day my wife's car would arrive at the apartment complex. Within 20 minutes of this man's car arriving, she'd go inside. Hours would pass, then she'd leave. I asked who he was. The investigator slid a printed profile across the table. The guy was 41 years old, worked in finance, had been divorced 2 years ago, and lived in Unit 3B at that apartment complex I'd suspected. He showed me the affair partner's social media, photos of him at the gym, at bars, on vacation. Normal-looking guy, nothing special. That somehow made it worse, but based on how comfortable they were with each other, he doubled down on his estimated 4 to 6 months. Right around the time I'd cut back on travel, I changed my entire work life to be home more for her, and she'd used that time to start an affair. The investigator walked me through every piece of evidence: dates, times, locations. He had footage of them at restaurants, at a movie theater, walking through a park. This wasn't just sex, this was a relationship. They looked comfortable together, happy even. He asked me what I wanted to do. I told him I didn't know yet, but I needed copies of everything. The investigator handed me a USB drive. He said it was all there: photos, videos, timestamps, the full report. He told me if I filed for divorce, this would be useful. I paid the investigator the remaining $3,200 in cash. He gave me his card and left. I sat at that table staring at the USB drive. I knew I needed to file for divorce. That was clear. But I wanted to confront her first. I wanted her to see that I knew. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. That's when I made my mistake. I went upstairs and started packing her things: clothes, shoes, toiletries, jewelry. I packed it methodically, almost calmly. It took me about 3 hours to get everything into suitcases and bags. Then I started carrying it all outside to the driveway. In my mind, this made sense. I wanted her to pull up, see her life sitting in the driveway, and understand that everything had changed. I wanted a visual representation of the destruction she'd caused. What I didn't think about was the legal ramification. In most states, you cannot lock someone out of a marital home without a court order, even if they're cheating. And putting someone's belongings outside can be considered an illegal eviction, which can hurt you in divorce proceedings. But I wasn't thinking clearly. I was angry, hurt, humiliated. So there I was, sitting in my living room at 10 p.m., surrounded by evidence of my wife's affair, with all her belongings piled in the driveway. And then I heard her car pull up. Through the window, I watched my wife's face go from confusion to panic immediately. She jumped out of the car, ran to the driveway, and started looking through the bags and suitcases. Then she ran to the front door and started pounding on it, yelling about what was going on and why her stuff was outside. I opened the door slowly. She tried to push past me, but I stepped into the doorway. I told her we needed to talk. She demanded to know why her stuff was in the driveway, asked if I'd lost my mind. I looked her right in the eye and told her I knew about him. She asked what I was talking about. I spelled it out for her. I told her I knew about her boyfriend, the apartment, the restaurants, the park, all of it. I told her I hired a private investigator and had photos, videos, dates, times, everything. She sounded like she was fumbling over her words but couldn't get them out. I told her not to lie to me, not now, because I had proof of everything. She started crying, saying it didn't mean anything. Told her not to insult me by saying it didn't mean anything when she'd been seeing him for months. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Multiple choices over and over again. She sobbed and said she was going to end it, swore she was going to end it. I asked her when, asked if she was going to end it before or after I restructured my entire career for her. She didn't have an answer. I reminded her how she complained for years that I was never home, how I fixed it, given up a huge chunk of my income and my best accounts to be there for her. And what did she do? She used that time to start sleeping with someone else. She tried to say it wasn't like that, but I stopped her. I told her to explain it to me then, explain how this happened, how 19 years of marriage meant so little to her that she threw it away for some divorced finance guy. She couldn't. She just stood there crying, and honestly, I felt nothing. No sympathy, no urge to comfort her, nothing. I told her she needed to leave. She said she couldn't, that this was her house too. I told her I didn't care, to figure it out, to go stay with her boyfriend, but she wasn't staying here tonight. She said I couldn't kick her out. I explained I wasn't kicking her out. I was asking her to leave so I could think. She refused, said it was her house. She lived there. I couldn't do this. That's when she pulled out her phone and called 911. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers showed up, a male officer and a female officer who looked a bit older. My wife immediately started explaining her side. saying I locked her out and thrown all her stuff in the driveway, that she lived there and I wouldn't let her in. The male officer asked if this was my residence. I confirmed it was, that we were both on the deed and we were married. He asked if I locked her out. I told him no, the door was unlocked. Her key worked. I just asked her to leave for the night. He asked about putting her belongings outside. I explained I'd found out she was having an affair and wanted her to understand that things were changing, but I hadn't locked her out or changed the locks. The female officer asked us both to step outside so they could talk to us separately. They interviewed my wife first, then me. I explained the whole situation to the officer, the affair, the private investigator, the evidence. I showed them the USB drive that was still in my pocket. I explained that I was planning to file for divorce, but had made an emotional decision to put her things outside. The male officer came back with his partner. He asked to confirm we were both on the deed. I said that was correct. He explained that neither of us could force the other to leave without a court order. Regardless of what she did, this was her legal residence, and she had every right to be here. I told him I understood. He said I needed to bring her belongings back inside. He explained that what I'd done, putting her stuff outside, could be considered an illegal eviction, and if she wanted to, she could cause legal problems for me. I said okay. I knew he was right. I let my emotions override my common sense. The female officer told my wife that if she felt unsafe, they could help her find resources, but legally, we both had the right to be in the home until a court said otherwise. My wife said she wasn't unsafe. She just wanted her stuff back inside. So I brought everything back in. Every suitcase, every bag, every box. The officers watched to make sure I did it. Then they left. My wife and I stood in the living room, surrounded by her belongings, in the most suffocating silence I've ever experienced. I told her I was sleeping in the guest room and not to talk to me. She nodded. I went upstairs, locked the guest room door, and didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I called a divorce attorney. She was highly recommended by a friend of mine who went through a divorce a few years ago. I met with the attorney that afternoon. I brought the USB drive with all the investigator's evidence. She reviewed it carefully and told me it was solid. She explained that in our state, we have no-fault divorce, so technically, the affair doesn't affect the dissolution of the marriage itself, but it can affect things like alimony and division of assets, especially if I could prove my wife used marital funds to support the affair. I asked how I'd prove that. She said we'd subpoena credit card records, bank statements, phone records, if my wife took him to dinner on our credit card, if she bought him gifts, anything like that would support my case. My attorney walked me through the process, filing a petition, serving my wife with papers, mediation, potentially going to trial if we couldn't agree on asset division. She also mentioned something I hadn't considered, that I'd have to live with my wife during this process unless one of us voluntarily moved out or got a court order. She asked if I could handle that. I told her I didn't have a choice. She explained that actually I did. I could move out temporarily, rent an apartment, stay with family, whatever. But if I did that, I needed to understand that it could affect my claim to the marital home later. So I was stuck. She advised me to stay in the house, be civil, document everything. If my wife did anything threatening, or if I felt unsafe, I should call the police and get a restraining order. But otherwise, just coexist until the divorce is finalized. I left my attorney's office with a 20-page packet of paperwork to fill out and a retainer agreement for $5,000. The next 3 months were the worst of my life. My wife and I lived in the same house, but barely spoke. I stayed in the guest room. She stayed in her bedroom. We developed an unspoken schedule for the kitchen and bathroom to avoid each other. Sometimes I'd hear her crying at night. Sometimes I'd hear her on the phone, presumably with the affair partner, though I didn't care enough to listen. She tried to talk to me a few times, asked if we could please discuss things, if we could try to work it out. I told her there was nothing to work out, that she'd made her choice. She said it was a mistake, that she'd ended it with him, that she'd told him she wanted to fix her marriage. I told her that was nice, and that the divorce papers were on the counter for her to sign. She didn't sign them, not at first. She hired her own attorney and started fighting me on asset division. She wanted half of everything, including my 401k in the house. My attorney petitioned the court for a forensic accountant to review our finances. Turns out my wife had been using our joint credit card to take the affair partner out to dinner, buy him gifts, even pay for a weekend trip they took together while I was at a medical conference. The forensic accountant itemized everything: $4,300 in dinners, $1,200 in gifts, $2,800 for the weekend trip, over $8,000 of marital funds spent on her affair. My attorney used that to argue against spousal support, pointing out to the judge that my wife had not only violated the marital trust, but had also used marital assets to fund her extramarital relationship, and therefore shouldn't benefit financially from this dissolution. My wife's attorney tried to argue that because we're in a no-fault divorce state, the affair shouldn't matter, but the judge disagreed when it came to alimony. The judge said that while the affair itself doesn't affect the grounds for divorce, the misuse of marital funds demonstrated a pattern of behavior that was relevant to the question of spousal support. Petition for alimony was denied. My wife was furious. She tried to appeal. Her attorney advised against it. Eventually, she accepted a settlement. She got 40% of the marital assets. I got 60% and the house. No alimony for either of us. We finalized the divorce 8 months after that night in the driveway. So here I am now, a year later, divorced, living in the same house, but it's just mine now. I repainted the bedroom, got rid of the furniture we'd picked out together, and basically erased every trace of my ex-wife from this place. I've had a lot of time to think about everything that happened. And if you're going through something similar, here's what I learned. First, trust your gut. I knew something was wrong months before I had proof. I could feel it. Don't ignore that feeling. Second, don't make emotional decisions. Putting her stuff in the driveway felt good in the moment, but it was stupid. It could have hurt me legally, and it made me look unstable. When you find out about an affair, your first call should be to an attorney, not a moving truck. Third, document everything. The private investigator was worth every penny. Without that evidence, my wife could have spun any story she wanted. The photos, the timestamps, the financial records, all of that protected me. Fourth, understand your rights. I didn't know that I couldn't force her out of the house. Ignorance of the law doesn't protect you. Talk to an attorney immediately so you know what you can and cannot do. Fifth, don't engage. My wife tried multiple times to have long, emotional conversations about why and how we got here. I refused. Those conversations go nowhere. They're just opportunities for more lies and manipulation. And finally, it gets better. I know that sounds cliche, but it's true. The first few months after I found out were hell. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I replayed every moment of our marriage, looking for clues I'd missed. But eventually, you move on. You heal. You realize that their betrayal says everything about them and nothing about you. I've started dating again. Nothing serious yet, but I'm open to it. I'm in therapy, working through the trust issues this brought up. And honestly, I'm happier now than I was in the last 2 years of my marriage. My ex-wife, from what I've heard through mutual friends, is still with the affair partner. They moved in together a few months after the divorce was finalized. I don't wish them ill. I just don't think about them at all. Looking back, I see now that our marriage was probably over long before she started the affair. We'd grown apart. We wanted different things. We'd stopped being partners and started being roommates. The affair was just a catalyst that finally ended something that was already dying. Would I have handled things differently? Absolutely. I would have skipped the dramatic driveway scene and gone straight to an attorney. I would have been smarter about documenting financial misuse earlier. I would have moved out temporarily instead of subjecting myself to months of living in the same house as her. But I can't change the past. I can only learn from it. So, if you're in a similar situation, take it from someone who's been there. Protect yourself legally, document everything, don't make emotional decisions, and remember that you will survive this. It doesn't feel like it in the moment, but you will. Thanks again, Tony. Sometimes it helps just to know you're not alone. Take care of yourselves out there.